or die, anybody killer who ain't looking like you or I. Staying down to the death, we learn young. As long as you got breath in a lung, then you keep soldiering 24/7 and get you a piece of this heaven. You got to kill or be killed, cause the world's corrupt. Just like, what's up, nigga, what you want to be up? Come with it, ain't nothing but a thing. Oh, so now you wanna flip, because then you got your game. But we don't give a 4-letter word. A set trip would just make me go wet a nerd. Couldn't care less about the physical fitness, cause this one little vandal can handle his witness. On the real, it wouldn't feel nothing about it, cause the jails is already overcrowded. Nah, this new generation ain't playing, cause see, these youngsters is dressed to kill. You know what I'm saying? You want to niggas act like they do, cause we made in America. I thought you knew. Living in America got you pissed, then bump your fist. And if you ever had handcuffs on your wrist, then pump your fist. I thought you knew. If you hate seeing black people get dissed, then pump your fist. And if you're tired of being caught up in that twist, then pump your fist. Parents weak in the mind and they call themselves grown, but God bless the child that's got his own. Ain't no fear in his heart when you start punking out. White people ain't your God, right? So what you worried about? Too set in your old ways. But 1995 damn sure ain't them old days. This ain't the year for a coward. I can't be with you, but I can keep your headstone flowered. Survival of the fittest, that's the law. You never seen grammar school kids socking teachers in they jaw? Well, they ain't trying to get brainwashed. Fuck Christopher Columbus, homeboy, how much your chain cost? I got that book, but I don't read it. I ain't dumb, I come to school heated, cause ain't no power in them pages you flipping. I'm better off blood than a crippin'. I wasn't born with the same mentality. I don't believe in no spirits, down here is reality. And everybody want wealth, but if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. I thought living in America got you pissed, pump your fist. And if you ever had handcuffs on your wrist, pump your fist. I thought if you hate seeing black people get dissed, then pump your fist. And if you tired of being caught up in that twist, pump your fist. So everything is real on this side. Ain't nothing spooky or dookie in this, right? Niggas be trying to act holy, and I be watching mankind break them down slowly but surely. Only the strong survive, while the rest fall by the wayside, praying they stay alive. But you had your turn it back, and you struck out. So now you just stuck out. Because if you don't use it right last, you lose it quite fast. And no doubt you just assed out. So make a way for the soldiers. Y'all can stay home and smoke your cigarettes and drink your Folgers. But this is wartime for the youth, and I don't trust nothing but the truth. So whatever's clever, whether strapping or capping, we moving and shaking, making things happen. Even a fool can see a change in progress with promise, but doubting Thomas is still saying I guess. Well, you can take it for what it's worth, but your heaven and hell is right here on earth. I thought if living in America got you pissed, pump your fist. And if you ever had handcuffs on your wrist, pump your fist. If you hate seeing black people get dissed, pump your fist. And if you tired of being caught up in that twist, pump your fist. Just busted you, and they 4 deep too. They seen all these caps and t-shirts and them gold things underneath the skirts, but the law ain't been broken. Wait, I see 3 white cops and 1 token. Oh, so that explains it, no doubt. Uncle Tom pointed us out, but I ain't trying to get jacked. They give me static, I'm giving the shit back, cause I ain't did nothing wrong. And this LA drama been going on too long, so it's on if they touch me. Matter of fact, they better Starsky and touch me, cause fool, I ain't waiting, I'm 5,000. So much for gold Dayton's, I hit a side street and circled twice. Shook 'em like hot dice, parked the toy in the driveway, cause the same thing happened last Friday. I tried to tell you they was devils once before, but y'all don't hear me though. Paging me 911. Who is that? This badass
white girl from?
Nigga, you went out like a straight Boy Scout.
What you talking about, fool? This girl is straight free.
Yeah, she probably have your ass at the clinic every week, asking the doctor, have you ever seen this? With a long wire Q-tip stuck up your penis, waiting for the test results to come back from upstairs while you say your prayers and ask yourself, was it really worth it? Before Casanova crossed over, everything was perfect, but you wasn't satisfied with the sisters, so now you got blisters. Trick or treat,
Nigga, you can eat a dick.
or vice versa. That's how you treat a trick nigga like you who ain't learned. They're hitting pale skins and get you burned. Man, y'all better let them white hoes go, but y'all don't hear me though.
Damn, Cam, I got a migraine.
What you eat?
Just some pork chops and pig feet and a couple of strips of bacon.
What?
And my head just started aching.
I hate to say I told you so, but I told you. You couldn't take it from a soldier. Cam got the ham broken down to a science. So keep it out your appliance. Cat plus rat plus dog equals hog. Poison-ass animal, people need to ban them all.
Nigga, I've been eating pork all my life and I'm cool.
Fool.
You don't know what you missed.
Listen, that's the reason why you get sick so quick and spend
Greetings, hello, happy day to all of you, and welcome to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We're so thankful that you are joining us today for this very important topic, the unknown contributions of Ethel Minor. Each week this week, we are dedicating the program to a wonderful African woman freedom fighter in history. So we're glad that you are deciding to spend your time today learning about a very worthwhile African woman, one who we would argue the anti-Zionist consciousness in the U.S. today, the understanding of the plight of the Palestinian people. I think it's a fair statement to say you would not have the level of consciousness around this were it not for the contributions of Sister Ethel Minor. So glad that you're joining us today to learn more about her. And as always, we want to give honor and thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. They are, of course, our reason for being here. 531 plus years, they are the caretakers of this land. And despite all of the reactionary propaganda that comes out on social media by people who I would be willing to bet $1,000 US dollars haven't read a single book on African indigenous relationships here. Despite all that negative propaganda, we owe a debt of gratitude to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere for their contributions fighting against colonialism for 500 plus years. And allowing us refuge when we needed it from the slave plantations. So we give honor and thanks to them. We, of course, give honor and thanks to our African ancestors. This past Monday, I had not talked to my sister. I had two sisters and a brother, and the oldest sister and the brother had passed away in recent years. And so it was just my sister 2 years older than I, who were still here, parents also deceased. And so I had not heard from that sister. And after we did a wellness check, unfortunately, they found her deceased in her apartment Monday of this past week. And so spent the last several days down in the city of San Francisco, where I was born and raised, where she still lived, handling all of the arrangements that are necessary when you have a loved one. She never married, she didn't have any children. And as I mentioned, we were each other's last sibling, parents deceased. So I am the next of kin. So my wife and my niece, who is the daughter of my oldest sister who passed away a few years ago, the three of us did all of the work. But it's just, I bring this up not to garner any empathy. Thank you, but that's not really what I need. But just to reinforce the fact that when we talk about ancestors in this beginning portion of this program, I don't see that as an individual thing at all. I don't see it as a thing where we're just talking about the people around us in our lives on an individual level. I see the fact that my sister passed away having just made age 65 2 months ago, and that my brother, my other sister, my mother, and my father, none of them reached the age of 70. And only one of them did that, my mother. Everyone else died before they, at 65 or under. I will be 63 years old in 2 months. This is not a coincidence, you all. That's why I'm bringing it up. This is a manifestation of internalized and generational oppression that we experience as a people. I don't give a damn if, you're upset at me saying that or not. It's not your family dying young. So this is something that reflects the conditions that we experience in this society. And, I do everything I can, because I've known this for a long time. I do everything I can to, try to ensure that I can stay as healthy as humanly possible. But there's a war going on against our people. And it manifests itself in many ways. And one of the many ways it does is in wearing us down as it relates to health. So, encouragement to you to look out for yourselves, look out for your family members. It's, whenever this is the third time this year that we've had to deal with managing the affairs of a family member that has passed on. And it's a grueling, difficult situation. It's something we all will have to deal with. But, I'm thankful for at least my sister did have her basic affairs were pretty easy to figure out. And so that made things a little easier than some of the other scenarios that we've had to endure. So I definitely wish her rest in power and peace. And we will continue to do this work, honoring all of our ancestors, my sister and everyone else who have contributed to our reason for being and being here. So we start with just introducing who we are, what this program is. Our Ancestors' Voices, again, is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. The AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, pan-African political party with a base in Africa, the national home of African people. And I had some clown arguing with me this morning, like, I'm not African. And these people they don't understand like who they're talking to when they're out here spouting this ignorance. And I told him, like, yeah, that's great. I don't want, when nobody's trying to claim you. Like, if you don't want to be African, that's fine. You be right here with the America you love. We're building a movement to liberate Africa. You want to be you're a line, because he's talking about I'm American, like all the white people. I'm like, well, you go on with them and see how well that works out with you. We don't care one bit what you do. We're not trying to beg people to be African, because we understand that the reason why our people don't claim Africa is because of 500 years of misinformation and disinformation about who we are and where we come from. So, at this point, 2025 and beyond, nobody's going to be trying to convince anybody of anything. If in this backward ass society, you have every right to be ignorant. Okay. Our job is to spread information. If you don't want it, that's your choice, and you live with the consequences of that. But that's who we are. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. And we see this as the solution to the problems we face all over the world. The reason why so many of our people are confused about who we are is because the multinational capitalists rely on cheap mineral resources and cheap labor in Africa to pad their profit margins. So the only way this system can continue in a way that continues to benefit them is if the 50 million Africans here are completely disconnected and confused about our relationship to Africa. So, we know we're not confused about that. So we continue to do our work, and the people who want to, take responsibility to understand the importance of that, we're here for you. And the others who don't, all of us we understand clearly we're not going to finish this journey. All of us who started it are not going to finish it. That's just a class reality of life. And so our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. It's all there for people that want to study. The book cover rather is on the screen, and he lays out the strategy for how we're going to achieve Pan-Africanism. And all we're simply doing is carrying that out, and we make better progress every day. Victory is on the horizon. And this particular program, Our Ancestors' Voices, is hosted each week by APRP organizers, myself, Ajamu, and my daughter, Shakura. As I've been mentioning the last couple of weeks, Shakura is taking a little time off to prepare for her PhD defense tomorrow at the University of Memphis, which she will take place, and a bunch of us will be supporting her virtually. She's told me multiple times this week she has every intention of being back here next Sunday. I give her grace. If she can't do that, we'll be here. She'll be back at the end of the month, but she's almost finished, and send her good vibes for tomorrow. And it's much easier to do this program every week with her than without her. So I definitely appreciate her being here and appreciate all of you being here. So we'll go ahead and get started with today's topic, which is the unknown contributions of Ethel Minor to African liberation. And to begin, we'll just start by talking about who Ethel Minor is. She was born in Chicago, Illinois, here in the United Snakes of America. And Miss Minor was actually living in the South American country of Colombia when Ella Baker, who was a board member for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, which was the organization of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Ella Baker called for the creation of a youth organization in the civil rights movement. And the reason why Ella Baker called for that is because she felt that there needed to be new young voices that had a different approach to engaging the struggle than the Southern Baptist dominated culture of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So she helped organize, she made the call, and was one of the chief organizers for the founding conference for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, at Shaw University in North Carolina in 1960. And from there, the student activism from SNCC and the Congress of Racial Equality Corps, along with SCLC and the NAACP, began to take route in the Southern US. And there, the picture on the screen depicts the lunch counter sit-in movement that was led by SNCC and CORE and the organizations I just mentioned, the Freedom Rides, integrated buses into the South. And I know, in 2025, it's really popular for, a bunch of keyboard warriors who haven't risked a fingernail for our people's liberation to talk down on the people who risk their lives fighting for us. It doesn't matter. Look, I'm a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. I wouldn't spend 5 seconds fighting for integration. That is not the struggle as I've ever seen it. If white people don't like me, I could give a damn. Just stay out of my damn way. because if you get in my way with that, you're going to have a very bad day. I can guarantee you that. But I don't give a damn if they like me or they want to be around me or they respect me. I don't need anything from them. We're fighting for Africa's liberation. We don't need white people to do a damn thing for us. We don't need them at all. If they want to work with us and be respectful, have mutually respectful relationships, we're all for that. If they don't want to do that, go straight to hell. So I'm not speaking from the standpoint of supporting the integration movement, but I am not stupid either. And I recognize that struggle that these youth engaged in contributed to the consciousness that led to the level of work that I'm engaged in right now. If we didn't have this, we never would have evolved to the point of becoming conscious enough to become revolutionary Pan-Africanists. The history is there for all who want to see it. The efforts by the SNCC organizers to organize the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, to integrate into the Democratic Party in this country, and them seeing the failures of that, right? And the next year, from that bruising experience, seeing the necessity to create an independent African political party in the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or the first Black Panther Party in Alabama in 1965, a year after the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party effort failed. And from there, the Black Power movement grew out of that. And we know that the highest expression of Black power is Pan-Africanism. So I'm not stupid. I recognize that I owe a debt to these young people, even if I didn't agree with them. I owe a debt to them and the work that they did. And I respect the work that they did. And they did those sit-ins and those freedom rides. And, this led to opening up the movement for social change in this society. And Miss Ethel Minor, living in Colombia and being fluent in English and Spanish, living in that South American country where Spanish was the official language, and working as a journalist, she had great skills that she had developed. And so she felt at that time that she should make a return to the U.S. to contribute to the struggle that she was seeing internationally on television that these youth from SNCC and CORE, et cetera, were carrying out. And she wanted to come back to the U.S. and make a contribution to this struggle. And so what she did, because Miss Minor, like a lot of us, did not relate to the philosophy, the Southern Baptist philosophy of nonviolence, the philosophy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and all of the people in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That didn't resonate with Miss Ethel Minor. So she instead chose to align herself with the nationalist platform of the Nation of Islam, primarily through, at that time, its chief spokesman, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X. And she came back and joined the Nation of Islam, and joined the Nation of Islam in their platform of separation of the races and what they were talking about. In the early 60s, she began to become a part of that movement. Now, what most people don't know is at that time, SNCC, even though SNCC was, again, heavily influenced by the Southern Baptist preachers, they began to think about expanding their consciousness, because they had gone down in these freedom rides. They had gone down to the southern states and done these sit-ins. They had experienced the raw terror and barbarism of Europeans in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, et cetera. They had experienced that. They had been beaten. They had been viciously beaten. A number of them have been killed. A number of them have been disappeared, and we still don't know where the bodies are. So they, coming back from those experiences, began to question the logic of a lot of what the Southern Baptist preachers were saying down there. And also they lived with the people in the South while they were carrying out the organizing work. And from that, they began to be radicalized, because the African people in the South, people like Amzie Moore, Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, you should study those people if you don't know who they are or what their contributions were. Those people had guns in their houses, even though they were members of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They weren't students and they were not nonviolent. And one time, a bunch of the SNCC activists were sitting in Mr. Amzie Moore's house, because they were living with him while they did the work. And he was in the corner cleaning his collection of shotguns, and they were preaching to him about the values of nonviolence. And he was listening to him, and he was saying, uh-huh. And after they got done, he told them, good luck with that. In other words, while y'all are singing and we shall overcome and doing that, I'm going to be reaching for these shotguns that'll be clean, loaded, and ready for action against our enemies. So this was the contradiction, and Malcolm X was a part of that, because a lot of what he was talking about was influencing the SNCC activists. And that's why they invited him to Howard University in 1961 to engage in a debate against Bayard Rustin, the chief architect of the nonviolent philosophy in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and other nonviolent civil rights organizations. And Malcolm dominated Bayard Rustin at Howard University that day. And the SNCC activists continued to maintain a relationship with him. Meanwhile, Miss Minor continued to participate in the in the Nation of Islam. She began to continue to participate, and it was at that time that she definitely began to move in the direction that Malcolm was moving, in terms of really outgrowing the message of the Nation of Islam and gaining a more international consciousness, a consciousness that was connected to the events happening around the world, a consciousness that revolved around Africa and all of those things. And so what Miss Minor most likely knew was this influence Malcolm was having on SNCC, and that this was broadening the consciousness of the SNCC organizers and surpassing the influence on the SNCC organizers even beyond that of which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. held sway to. And so I'm sure Miss Minor began to understand that. And so what moved to happen is that Miss Minor continued her activism. In March of 1964, resulting from the increasing political sophistication that Malcolm X had and sabotage from the US government, Malcolm left the Nation of Islam. And many of its members, including Miss Minor, left with him. Now, I want to just say quickly, just a little more about that when I talk about Malcolm's political sophistication, because I would argue that the things that Malcolm was doing that, most of you know, because you watched that silly movie that Spike Lee did, Malcolm X, but you saw in there that they showed how Malcolm made the comments on December 1st, 1963, about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the then president of the US, a few weeks before that on November 22nd, 1963. And in that press conference on December 1st, 1963, Malcolm was already told by Elijah Muhammad not to make any public statements. He had already been told that. And that had happened because Malcolm had questioned Elijah Muhammad about the children that he apparently had out of wedlock, Elijah Muhammad. So because of that, Elijah told him, you're causing dissent in the nation, you can't speak. And so Malcolm did a press conference. So right there, he was in direct defiance of Elijah Muhammad. But then he poured oil on the fire because the reporter asked him what he thought about John F. Kennedy's assassination. And that's when he made his famous, "the chickens coming home to roost" comment, talking about the violence that the US government had perpetuated in the Congo. We talked about Miss Andre Bluen and her work in the Congo last week. And the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, we call them criminals in action, their call for the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, the democratically elected prime minister of the National Congolese movement in the Congo in 1960. Malcolm talked about that at that 1963 press conference. He talked about how the US had orchestrated sabotage in the Congo so that they could gain greater access to the uranium to build these nuclear weapons for the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Malcolm broke all that down, and how Lumumba and the National Congolese movement stood in the way of that because they wanted independence. They wanted the resources of the Congo to be used for the benefit of the Congolese people and African people everywhere, not for the benefit of capitalist corporations. Malcolm talked about that. And he talked about how because of that, because of Lumumba and their desire to be independent, a right that they certainly had, the U.S. assassinated Patrice Lumumba. And Malcolm said the violence that the U.S. perpetuated in was going to come back around. And that happened with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so for that, of course, that completely ruptured the relationship between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, because Elijah Muhammad was talking about we giving press conferences after that December 1st session, talking about we love this president of this country. I mean, you can get mad at me for saying that, but that's on YouTube. That's documented. Anybody that does their homework instead of sitting around passing gas and being a keyboard warrior would know that already. So this is where Malcolm was clearly demonstrating he had outgrown. Nothing against the Nation of Islam. They serve a productive purpose in our community. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Nation of Islam. They were the first organization to have anybody talk to me about how insane I was as a youth. So I have respect for them, even if I don't agree with anything they're talking about, because I can do that. I can have respect for people, and I can work with people who I don't agree with, because I understand this is bigger than me, and it's bigger than us in the AAPRP. We understand that. So this is what happened. And Malcolm left the Nation of Islam and began his second time traveling to Africa. Most of you think, because all you know is that movie, that when he went to Africa in 1964, that was the first time he went, but that's not true. He went in 1959 as an emissary of Elijah Muhammad, and he went to several countries in Africa as a representative of the Nation of Islam. But in 1964, in the summer, he went as his own activist and organizer, and he came back after meeting with Kwame Nkrumah, meeting with Sekou Touré, meeting with Julius Nyerere, meeting with Gamal Abdel Nasser, and so many other revolutionary Pan-Africanist leaders on the continent. He came back inspired and formed the Organization of Afro-American Unity of July of 1964, which he saw as the U.S. branch of the Organization of African Unity in Africa, because Malcolm was now finally able to articulate and activate his Pan-African consciousness, something he would not have been able to do within the Nation of Islam. So Malcolm and Miss Minor's transition from the Nation of Islam to the OAAU represents their Pan-African consciousness. And Miss Minor became the Organization of Afro-American Unity's office manager in Harlem, their office there in the Hotel Teresa on 125th Street. I've actually been there and saw where they had an office there and stood there and took pictures and had ceremony with Shakura there when she was a very young child. We went in there, I've retraced pretty much every place that Malcolm went and did work, and that was one of them. And so she became the office manager there in Harlem. And of course, on February 21st, 1965, Malcolm was assassinated, and that spelled the end of the OAAU. But it didn't spell the end of Miss Minor's activism, because promptly after that, understanding the necessity of organization, Miss Ethel Minor promptly joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who at that time was heavily influenced by the ideas of Malcolm X, heavily influenced, and began to openly question nonviolence. And this is why, if you study the history of SNCC and activism, you'll know this, because the last major march, well, before that, in 1966, early part of 1966, the SNCC chairpersonship came under election. And up to that point, the chairperson during the mid-60s was John Lewis, the former congressperson who made his physical transition, I believe 5 years ago. And John Lewis, by his own admission, was a student of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and was heavily influenced by the Southern Baptist Christian tradition that he himself grew up under and came under. And in the election in 1966 for the new SNCC chairperson, it was John Lewis, running for re-election against Kwame Ture, who was then known as Stokely Carmichael. And Kwame represented the new militancy within SNCC, the separation from the ideas of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin, separation from the commitment to nonviolence, and the desire to see SNCC become more of a militant organization. And after much internal struggle, Kwame emerged as the new chairperson of SNCC. And he talked about that for him, nonviolence was no longer a principle, as it had been for John Lewis and Dr. King and SCLC. It was a tactic. The difference being a principle is a value you never compromise on. Like, I'm a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, which means Africa is primary for me, because I see what happens to Africa is influencing what happens to African people everywhere on earth. So whatever happens in America, that's not primary to me. And that doesn't mean I'm not involved in activism work in America. I mean, I have to say that because some of us are just so empty-headed. That doesn't mean that. In fact, I put my life more on the line here than a lot of people who say they love America. And I'm not doing it for America. I'm doing it for justice. But my point is that they began to understand this question of, the value question of around nonviolence, and that nonviolence could not be a principle. It had to be a tactic, because as Kwame Ture himself famously stated, and I have the poster of him right above me here in my office, in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. Those are the words of Kwame Ture, and they reflected the growing consciousness within SNCC. They began to advocate that all SNCC members, they had a choice whether they wanted to be armed or not, but most of them chose to be armed. And the white media in this country misunderstood that because of the title, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Kwame Ture went on Face the Nation, Meet the Press, and every other media outlet explaining that nonviolence is a tactic. It's not a principle. If it's effective to use nonviolence to gain forward progress, we'll use it. But if these crackers are assaulting us, we'll send them to their grave. And this is without question influence from the work of El Hajj Malik, El Shabazz, Malcolm X. And SNCC went to this, and the March Against Fear, where James Meredith was shot in June of 1966 in Mississippi. And the three civil rights organizations, CORE, SNCC, and SCLC, took over the march. And the NAACP was there, but what happened is Kwame was the new chairperson for SNCC. And Kwame wanted to invite the Deacons for Defense, who were former war veterans, African people in the southern states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, who formed gun organizations to protect civil rights workers. And Kwame wanted to invite them to come along for the March Against Fear. And Whitney Young of the Urban League and Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, they absolutely refused to accept that because, all their money came from white people. So they couldn't accept armed resistance during the march. So they backed out of supporting the march. Dr. King, because he was a principled human being, meaning he did his best to do what was right, despite the consequences, stayed in the march. And of course, SNCC and CORE, the militant elements of the civil rights movement, were at the forefront of the march. And the Deacons for Defense were there. And I would argue that the marches that they participated, it would have been more people injured, more people killed had they not been a presence. And nobody, even the people who were nonviolent, can refute that statement. They have to agree with that statement. But the point is that this reflected the growing consciousness within SNCC. So when Miss Ethel Minor joined SNCC in 1965, 1966, SNCC was primed to become the most cutting-edge militant organization in the U.S. at that time. And so I'll get to the picture in a minute, but the picture you see there is Miss Ethel Minor at Via Sili in Guinea-Conakry. And that was where Kwame Nkrumah lived in Guinea after his government was illegally overthrown by the CIA in Ghana in February of 1966. And so you see in the picture, Miss Minor there, Kwame Nkrumah on her left, and Kwame Ture on her right, who was then still Stokely Carmichael. But Miss Minor began working in communications for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And in the course of that, she made the suggestion that SNCC look at this question of Israel. And the reason why she made this suggestion is because at that time, by the time 1967 came around, when she made that suggestion, what the so-called Arab-Israeli War happened. And there was a lot of sentiment in this country. There was a development of many reactionary elements among the African population. There was the creation of this group called BASIC, which still exists to this day. BASIC, BASIC. And BASIC is Black Americans in Support of Israel Committee. It's still a lobbying in existence, lobbying today. And people like Al Sharpton and all of the Congressional Black Caucus, all of them are members of BASIC today. That's why they all support Israel. They're all the people like Cory Booker, Zionists. They support Israel. They're all a part of BASIC. But the organization started in the late 60s. And at that time, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a member of BASIC, because people then and still today are very confused around this Zionist question. And we've done plenty of workshops on the question of Zionism, the Zionist state of Israel, its exploitation of Africa. So you should go back and look at those. We don't have time to get into that deeply today, but we will say that Miss Minor, having been in the Nation of Islam, and another reason why I say I have to respect the Nation of Islam is because they were the first anti-Zionist organization in the U.S. No question about that. They were anti-Zionist in the 40s, and I have to respect Elijah Muhammad, even though I don't agree with him. And I am a protege of Malcolm X, so of course I'm going to feel a certain way about Elijah Muhammad. That's just how it is. Whoever doesn't like that, that's just your damn problem. Just like if you're a follower of Elijah Muhammad, you feel a certain way about Malcolm X, and that's just how that goes. But I have to respect Elijah Muhammad because in the 1940s, when faced with enlisting in the U.S. military and going to fight in World War II, he chose to go to prison, and proudly went to prison and served almost 5 years in prison. And that's respect to me, because again, that's somebody that stood by their principles. He didn't just say, well, I preach that stuff in public, but I ain't trying to go to jail like a lot of you would do. So I just, whatever you need me to do, sir, I'll do it so I can stay out of jail. He didn't do that. He went to prison and served that time. And he has my respect for that. And he came out when the state of Israel was established in 1948. He came out against it. Now, there's a lot of weird and quirky theology around this from a lot of people. The Hebrew Israelites, the Nation of Islam, a lot of Africans have what I would argue is very confused theology around this question of the Zionist state of Israel. The question to us is not we should be there and not the Ashkenazi European Jews. Our position is that the land belongs to the Palestinian people, and it was stolen from them by these Ashkenazi Jews in alliance with international imperialism. And the state of Israel was established to serve as a base for international imperialism in the Middle East. And that's the reason why backward capitalist regimes like the United Snakes of America, all of Europe, at that time, the apartheid state of South Africa, all of these backward entities supported the establishment of the state of Israel and have been doing it for the last 100 years. So Miss Minor, being in the Nation of Islam, hearing Malcolm and the other leaders within the nation speak against the Zionist state of Israel had a strong anti-Zionist consciousness. Malcolm X in 1964, while he was in Egypt during his travels in Africa, gave a historic speech called Zionism and Dollarism. You should look it up, Zionism and Dollarism. And in that speech, Malcolm talked about what I just said, how Zionism was a strategy. It had nothing to do with religion. I know a lot of you are confused because you haven't studied it and you just, this is what they told, whatever whatever her name is, that Negro woman on TV, Grace, the newscaster, the Oprah's friend, I don't know her, Grace King, whatever the hell, I don't know her goddamn name. But she said that you should support Israel. So a lot of us believe that. And so that confusion. But if you study it, you know that this whole question is one of colonialism and settler colonialism. And the Zionist state of Israel is the poster child for settler colonialism. And settler colonialism is when colonizers come to a country and take over that country and stay there, taking over that country. So the Zionist state of Israel taking over Palestine, that's settler colonialism. The European colonialists from Europe coming to Zimbabwe, coming to Azania, or what they call South Africa, coming to Kenya, coming to every part of Africa and colonizing it is colonialism. In Zimbabwe and Azania, they're still there. So that's settler colonialism. White people are still in what they call South Africa. They're still in Zimbabwe in large numbers. So that's settler colonialism. Same as the Zionist state of Israel. The United States of America and Canada are settler colonial regimes where Europeans came here like they did the other places I just mentioned. They invaded them and they stayed there and took it over. This is a settler colony here. That's what it is. So Miss Minor was well educated on all of these things. She understood it wasn't this land is your land, this land is my land, this land belongs to you and me. That's complete bullshit. This land here belongs to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and all of their manifestations, whether they call themselves indigenous, whether they call themselves Indians, Chicanos, Mexicanos, Mexican Americans. This is their land right here. And the only reason why Africans want to fight them for it is because you're completely ignorant about Africa. That's why. And if you want to be ignorant, that's your choice. I'm done entering my mid-60s. I'm done arguing with stupid people, or what they say. I'm done arguing with people that Harriet Tubman would have shot. I'm done with that. I'm here for the people who are open-minded and want to learn. And this is just me. I know, like, my comrades in the APRP, something like, oh, you shouldn't say that, but I'm just telling you the truth. I've done a lot of that. I'm done with that. If somebody doesn't want to learn, they have a right to be stupid. I'm not going to try to waste my time with people like that. I'm trying to work with the people who are willing to do some work and understand what needs to be done. But Miss Minor began to understand that. And that, she suggested that SNCC develop a paper, an educational paper on the question of Zionism. And she volunteered to write that paper. And she wrote it. And it had a galvanizing effect on the civil rights movement. Because in that paper, and you can look up the paper she wrote, it's called the SNCC Paper on Israel and the Arab Question, something to that effect. And she talked about the history of the Zionist movement. She talked about the first Zionist conference in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, and Theodor Herzl was the convener of the conference, and that he was an atheist. He didn't even believe in God, which he admitted in his written memoir. That's not an opinion. And he saw the establishment of the state of Israel as simply a strategic mechanism for international imperialism. And they weren't even focused on Palestine initially. They had other places like Venezuela, Uganda was somewhere that they were looking at settling this Zionist state, and they ended up in occupied Palestine because of its strategic location as it relates to shipping and controlling world commerce. So they did that, right? I mean, it's not an accident that a settler colony was smack dab in the middle of the main sea passages in the Middle East, and a settler colony was smack dab in the middle of the main sea passages from the Indian Ocean through the Atlantic Ocean under Azania, South Africa. That's not a accident that these settler colonial regimes were set up in these strategic locations. So she talked about that in her paper. She talked about how the World Zionist Congress collaborated with all the countries in Europe to encourage those countries to force their Ashkenazi European Jewish populations to want to leave those countries in Europe, countries like Romania and Hungary and Russia and Albania and all of these places, to leave those countries and Germany, and instead support this establishment of a Zionist state in occupied Palestine. And even the Third Reich in Germany was one of the countries that the World Zionist Congress, yes, these so-called Jews, collaborated with the Nazis to encourage the Nazis to push the Ashkenazi Jewish people to support the Zionist state of Israel. She talked about all this, and there's so much documented material about this. You should read a book called Zionism in the Age of Dictators by Lenny Brenner. Zionism in the Age of Dictators. And he lays all of this out, because you will never understand this relying on social media reels to get your political education. You will never understand this. You got to do some work. You got to do some work. And if you don't want to do the work, that's okay. We're not telling you you have to do the work, but don't waste our time, right? And understand what I mean when I say that. When you come to me and you don't know what the hell you're talking about, and I'll know that immediately. I'll know it immediately. And I'll say any cadre in this organization I belong to will know that immediately. And a lot of the people who are pre-cadre and even work study will know that immediately. And so when you come to us and you don't know what you're talking about, I'm going to tell you, you don't know what you're talking about. Here, read these books and then come back and talk to you. I'm not wasting my time. Don't waste our time. So this is what happened. And her paper caused an international scandal as it related to this question of Zionism. And the people in SNCC, understanding the clear and comprehensive arguments that Ms. Minor laid out in her paper, wanted to talk about the paper and wanted it to become official policy within SNCC. And so in 1967, this happened. And SNCC became the first civil rights organization to take, remember I told you, the civil rights organizations were supportive of BASIC, Black Americans in Support of Israel Committee. SNCC became the first organization to break with that and to become anti-Zionist and to support the Palestine Liberation Organization and support the movement to bring liberation of Palestine for the Palestinian people. SNCC did that. As they did in many instances, they took groundbreaking positions in the civil rights movement beyond just the question of rights for African people. That's why they were such a phenomenal organization. And this consciousness spread, and it spread into once SNCC began to fall apart, because once SNCC took this anti-Zionist position, their funding dried up because their funding was largely contributed by the Zionists here in the US, around the world, liberal Zionists. And so that dried up immediately. And the federal government's attacks against SNCC, like every other organization, by late 1968, SNCC was struggling to exist. And by 1970, they really didn't exist for the most part. And Kwame Ture, understanding this, went to Guinea-Conakry, where he is in the picture, and met with Secretary and Kwame Nkrumah. And the next year, 1969, he moved there to Guinea-Conakry to become the political secretary for Kwame Nkrumah and to work within the Democratic Party of Guinea, the political party of Secretary. Miss Ethel Minor, as you see in the picture, visited there. And as we've talked about, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party came about as a result of Kwame Nkrumah writing the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare while he was in Guinea-Conakry being protected by the Democratic Party of Guinea in Sekou Touré. And the first work study circle for the APRP took place in Guinea-Conakry, and Kwame Ture and Kwame Nkrumah were members of that first circle, along with Amilcar Cabral and others. And so this anti-Zionist position that SNCC brought into the public consciousness, it was an original foundation within the All African People's Revolutionary Party, right? And so a lot of the anti-Zionist consciousness that's within the APRP has to be credited to Miss Ethel Minor. And in fact, in 1991, the what they call the Anti-Defamation League, which is one of the leading Zionist organizations in this country, the ADL, we call them the African Death League, but they produced a pamphlet. You should look it up. It's called Black Demagogues and Hate Teachers. And in that pamphlet, they focused primarily on Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. But they did say in that pamphlet that the All African People's Revolutionary Party was the, quote, most anti-Zionist organization, unquote, within the U.S. And we read that with glee at that time. We couldn't have been happier. It's the ultimate compliment when your enemy says that you're its biggest problem. That's the ultimate compliment your enemy can give you. So that's how we took it. But all of this anti-Zionist consciousness, it has to be in large part credited to the contribution of Miss Ethel Minor. Had she not left the Nation of Islam and joined SNCC, had she not written that paper, had she not done the work to spread the consciousness around that paper in SNCC, we don't know if we would have developed an understanding of Zionism to the same extent that we have today. And so when Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael then left the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, spent some time, about a year or so, in the Black Panther Party, and decided that that would not be the course of action that he saw necessary to forward our struggle. And so he, as I mentioned, went to Africa and became one of the initial organizers for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And Miss Ethel Minor herself, again, understanding the importance of organization, joined the AAPRP herself and was on one of the original central committees, if not the original central committee for the AAPRP. And that's just, just giving you some context of her understanding of the necessity for organization and the evolving consciousness from the Nation of Islam to the Organization of Afro-American Unity, to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Ms. Minor understood that organization is always the key to our ability to build capacity and to fight back. And that's a message that can never get too old, you all. It can never get too old. And the reason why it can't get too old is because most of us are not in any organization and don't want to be in any organization. And get mad when we talk about organization. And that is a large part of the reason why we're where we are today, because organization is the weapon of the oppressed. And as it says there in the Kwame Ture poster, organization decides everything. Nothing in your life worthwhile have you been able to accomplish without organization. If you've gone to school and gotten a degree, you have to have organization. If you have a slave, if you have a job, you have to have some level of organization. If you have a family, you have to have some level of organization. There's no way you can exist in the world today and have no respect for organization. You might be completely disorganized, but you have to, even if you're completely disorganized, you still respect people who demonstrate a high level of organization, because you know that it's an absolute necessity to move forward in this life that we live. So this is why we know this is not a debate. This is not something where everybody has an opinion. This is exactly one thing. Organization decides everything. That's irrefutable. And so that means that we cannot solve the problems we face individually. We cannot solve them just because we have thoughts between our ears. This is like, get on social media and look at what these people are talking about. And I'm talking about everybody, but specifically African people. Look at what we're talking about. We don't know a damn thing. We don't know anything. We sit around and like, I would be embarrassed to be talking publicly, documenting, writing down my ideas about something I knew nothing about. I would be embarrassed to do that. I don't want to talk about anything if I don't know anything about it. I sound stupid to myself doing that. I know I must sound stupid to other people, but yet every day that's what we do. Uh, we don't have any modesty and humility about being able to say. You don't ever hear people say, you know what, I don't know what the hell. I mean, sometimes you do, and when you do see that, it's very refreshing. Like, I had a young brother not that long ago. Someone had posted something, respect for Kwame Ture, and he was like, he sold us out. He was a police agent. And I know that this was an FBI talking point. I know this because I've studied it. So I told the young African that, and I gave him resources to look it up. And he responded. He said, you know, I didn't know that. I appreciate you, OG, telling me that. Now that's humility. That's humility. That's certainly how I try to conduct my life, but not a whole lot of people do that. I gave that young brother praise for that too. But not a whole lot of us do that. Our egos are so big and we're so self-centered that we have a difficult time admitting we were wrong. We don't even know how to do that. We don't even have the self-awareness to say that we're wrong. So when we say something and someone says, yeah, that's not right, it's this, our first instinct is to argue because our ego won't let us say, you know what, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I need to listen and learn something here. And it's that egoism, it's uh, that arrogance about being so damn ignorant that is really an obstacle for us being able to move forward. So what we do today is we ask everybody, think about that. You know, Miss Minor used all of her language skills, her journalism skills to help advance our struggle. Everybody, all of you have a skill that can help our struggle. But that skill is being severely underutilized if you're not in an organization which allows you to expand the potential of that skill. That's what it does. And so we need everybody to understand that. That's the beauty of Miss Minor, is that she certainly understood that. And she made a tremendous contribution to our struggle. And she wasn't in the forefront of our struggle. She wasn't somebody that you learned about. Most of you probably never heard of her before this, but she made a serious contribution. And the point I'm making is all of us can do that if we just take the same approach to organization that she did. And so we definitely want to thank you for joining us today. And we want to invite you back next week, March 23rd, same time, same place, same platforms. And we're going to talk about the unknown life of Fathia Nkrumah, the unknown life of Fathia Nkrumah. She was the wife of Kwame Nkrumah. Very little known about her. We've done our research and we're prepared to give you some information about her life. And we can tell you right now, she was way, way more than just the wife of Kwame Nkrumah. So join us next week so you can find out more. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, you can click on that, the red and white one. It gives you plenty of information about other AAPRP programs. So check that out. And then the Forward Ever shop, you can buy clothes that support our African revolutionary work. So do that. Go to hoodcommunist.com. It's a revolutionary Pan-African blog. So we really encourage you to support Hood Communist, okay, so that we can, you know, have analysis out there. And we want you to contribute. I was informed by comrades that I have the wrong link up here and I forgot to change it. So apologies for that. We have a GoFundMe page to make contributions to organizing African Liberation Day. It's our international institution. May 25th each year. We'll be doing it all over the world, about 20 cities around the world. It's our institution to bring about the consciousness of African people around the necessity to unite. So we want to ask you that you contribute. We use the funds you contribute to help commemorations throughout the African continent. So don't go to what's on the left-hand screen there. But if you want to go to abenero.me, there's a button you can click, you can donate there, and 100% of it will be donated to African Liberation Day. And we'll get the right link up there next week. And we want to invite you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can do that by going to www.aaprp-intl.org. And there's a video there you can watch. You can learn. You should do it even if you don't want to join, just so you understand what this organization is and our work. You should be well versed on every African organization that's fighting for African people. How can you decide which one you want to join if you don't know anything about any of them? So that's a good thing to do just for your own research. But we encourage you to join a work-study circle. Start your political education process. That's important. If you're African, you can do that. And all people of African descent are African in our view. So you can do that. If you agree with that, fine. If you don't agree with that, don't come to the site. Don't waste our time. You need to go to we're creating a imaginary Negro identities in the U.S. site, and talk to those people. Those are your people. Go talk to them. But if you're open-minded, you want to learn something, you can come to our site. We're happy to talk to you. The bottom right-hand corner, QR code, Burkina Books, become a sponsor. That's one of our on-the-ground works in Africa and Burkina Faso. So you can become a monthly sponsor. We're incorporating revolutionary literature for our people on the ground. This is, again, growing our consciousness for the necessity for unity. And my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8. Unfortunately, you can only buy it on Amazon. I've explained that 100 times. If you missed it, go back and look at it. I'm not wasting my time doing that anymore. We use the enemy's platforms to advance our struggle, and all 100% of the proceeds of that. But it's a great book in terms of organizing, how to organize. People reading it all over the world. And I've gone to speak to many groups to, after they've read it, to give some context. So, you can use it for that. But it's a great book on organizing. But it's also 100% of the proceeds go towards anti-fascist work. Obviously, that's a thing. We're doing it. Doing a lot of trainings and work around that. So we appreciate you joining us today. We hope to see you back next week. Tell some people, enjoy your life. You don't know how long it's going to be. The best way to enjoy it is to join the struggle for liberation. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your day.